Gojo versus Sukuna has been the primary topic of discussion amongst the Jujutsu Kaisen fanbase for several weeks now, and very reasonably so. The build-up for this fight has existed for nearly the entire series, and as the strongest characters in the verse, it makes sense that Gojo and Sukuna alike are functioning at the highest levels we have ever seen in the series, possibly the highest levels in Jujutsu Kaisen history. But more than Gojo versus Sukuna, I think there are some fights that are going to surpass it, not only in terms of quality, but in terms of importance to the overarching narrative of the story. So in this video, I'll be taking a look at two very possible futures for the final fight of Jujutsu Kaisen. In regards to the ending of the series, specifically its final battle, within the innumerable mysteries that Gege has yet to reveal, one thing remains blatantly obvious. Either Sukuna or Kenjaku will be the final opponent for the main cast, and this fact makes itself relatively clear based on their respective power, build-up, and narrative importance to the remaining characters. For Kenjaku, you have the long-term planning and scheming that has constructed the entire course of the series as we know it. When talking about pure influence in a historical context, Kenjaku is easily the superior antagonist when comparing him to Sukuna. He also has personal connections to the likes of Gojo, Yuta, Choso, and a bit more loosely, Yuji for a myriad of reasons. Gojo, Yuta, and Choso's reasons for wanting to defeat Kenjaku specifically feel much more personal and visceral when compared to the likes of Yuji. Gojo wants to lay the body of Suguru Geto to rest. Yuta wants to step up to the plate and make sure that his sensei doesn't have to take on that burden once more, and Choso deeply resents Kenjaku for birthing him and his brothers, as well as killing Yuki Tsukumo in the pursuit of scientific curiosity. Technically speaking, Choso's motivations could very easily apply to Yuji. However, currently, he doesn't seem to bear a very personal grudge towards his mother, and hates Sukuna significantly more, at least where we are currently in the story. Now, for the reasons mentioned above, it's completely within the realm of possibility that Kenjaku is the true final villain of the series, and Gege intends on him being the final opponent of our main characters, potentially after the defeat or severe injury of Gojo at the hands of Sukuna. While this isn't my preferred way of concluding the story, it isn't at all an illogical way to go about doing so. Kenjaku has the motivations, the power, and the ambition in order to be a final antagonist. If you have Gojo and Sukuna incapacitate each other, or even have Megumi be a key factor in removing Sukuna from the board, you can have the main cast fight Kenjaku and the potential super curse spirit that he's been attempting to create for centuries. Several character arcs would be able to resolve themselves within the scope of this battle, the mastermind of the verse would be defeated, and the next generation of sorcerers would be cultivated into stronger, more reliable characters just as Gojo intended. While Kenjaku isn't the strongest villain that Gege could throw at the main characters, he is powerful enough to give them all a challenge, and in Yuta and Yuji's case specifically, I could see an awakening occur that sets them on the path to becoming the strongest, just as Gojo wanted for them. Some fan favorites would definitely die in this battle just due to the nature of Jujutsu Kaisen and Gege's writing style, but whoever was strong enough to survive and remain in spite of that would likely have awakened or evolved along the trajectory that Gojo intended from the very beginning. This is the first option, and depending on who you are and what you think of the story, this is the correct option as well. However, as you may have been able to surmise from the thumbnail and the interjection of my personal opinions throughout this speculation, this is not the option that I think is most likely, it's not the one I think makes the most sense, and it's certainly not the one that I would personally like to see the most. When referring to the fight that encompasses all of those things, when referring to what I think the final fight of Jujutsu Kaisen looks like, we have to take a look not at Kenjaku, but at Sukuna, the king of curses and the character that our main protagonist hates more than anyone else in the entire world. The first chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen is titled after a character. It's not Yuji, despite him being the protagonist of the story. It's not Megumi, despite him being the one to introduce Jujutsu into Yuji's life. And it isn't Gojo, despite him being the reason that the main character still draws breath. The character that this first chapter is named after is none other than Ryomen Sukuna, my personal pick to be the final antagonist, and the villain who I think has the most emotional, thematic, and narrative build-up behind him, even surpassing the likes of Kenjaku. Now, I know I said that Kenjaku is historically the most important character in the entire story, and that still remains to be the case. He has been the most prevalent character in the story when talking about lifespan, only truly being rivaled by the likes of Tengen and Sukuna on a technicality, but through his own admission, he has been much more of an active participant in the construction of sorcerer and cursed spirits historically. Sukuna has existed as a cursed object for a majority of his lifespan, and Tengen was a hermit who did not actively attempt to influence the course of human history and evolution in the same way that our resident Brainiac did. All of these facts make Kenjaku the most important antagonist in a very logical, very pragmatic sense, but Sukuna is the villain who has the emotional and thematic connections to the most important characters in the series, Yuji and Megumi. The strongest sorcerer of the Heian era is the reason that Yuji's life has taken so many tragic turns. It's the reason that Yuji is even involved in Jujutsu to begin with. He's a constant thorn in Yuji's side. He continuously berates and antagonizes him for the fun of it, and he has tormented Yuji specifically, likely more than any other character in the series thus far, with the only one that you can even argue pulling even to him being Mahito, another very personal, very thematic, and very emotionally resonant villain for Yuji. The only other character in the series who has been harassed by Sukuna to an even remotely similar extent is none other than Megumi, the new vessel for Sukuna, and the one who was forced to kill his sister with his own hands, with his own cursed technique. The protagonist and deuteragonist respectively have the strongest core connections with Sukuna, and I don't think it's a coincidence that neither of them share nearly as strong of an established connection with Kenjaku. In a roundabout way, all of Yuji and Megumi's connections come back to him, but neither of them truly seem to have the on-screen dynamic, the on-screen relationship with him that you might expect from a main antagonist protagonist duo. Yuji has barely talked to Kenjaku. Megumi has barely mentioned him or even been aware of his character, and as far as I know, Kenjaku hasn't even said Megumi's name once throughout this entire story. Logically speaking, Kenjaku is the one to blame. Emotionally speaking, Sukuna is the one who has garnered that hatred from both of these characters. Could this mean that Yuji and Megumi's beef lies more with Kenjaku than Sukuna? Sure, it definitely could, but when writing the story in the way that he has, I think Gege has established that these three characters are linked in a way that many others in the story aren't. Yuji was the vessel of Sukuna, and aside from saving people and dying a proper death, Yuji's most prominent motivation is to consume all of Sukuna's fingers and then die. Most of Megumi's major conflicts in the series almost all tie back to Sukuna as well. The first time he prepares to summon Mahoraga is against Sukuna when he incarnates into Yuji. Next, he is confronted by a curse bearing Sukuna's finger alongside Yuji in chapter 6. He then fights Sukuna in the flesh in chapter 9 and gains his attention and curiosity. His first real awakening happens when he is fighting another cursed spirit who has consumed one of Sukuna's fingers. The first time we see Mahoraga fight an opponent, the person who shows up and demonstrates both his and Mahoraga's power is none other than Sukuna, and the instant he falls into despair, the instant he loses his cool, Sukuna is there, ready to pounce and incarnates into his body. There are smaller, less relevant fights that Megumi takes part in throughout the story, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out that Megumi's narrative is almost as intertwined with Sukuna's as Yuji's is. And now that Sukuna is the reason that his sister, his whole motivation for living, is dead, Megumi truly has a reason to hate him with all of his might, just like Yuji. The story started with Megumi, Sukuna, and Yuji as a weird, twisted trio, and something tells me that the story is also going to end focusing on these three. Obviously, Kenjaku is going to be a huge player, regardless of whether or not he is a factor in the final fight, and there are so many moving pieces in the story right now that it takes an oracle to predict exactly how this fight will come to pass or what circumstances are needed to occur in order for Sukuna to be confronted by Yuji primarily. But with how unorthodox Gege's writing choices can be, I see a reality in which a majority of the heavy hitters have to attend to Kenjaku in order to stop him from furthering his plans, while Yuji ignores towards this to fight Sukuna in a weakened state. One obvious issue that I'm sure people have with this idea is the fact that Megami is currently indisposed right now, not only because he's a vessel for Sukuna, but because his soul has likely taken some massive damage over the course of being Sukuna's body while fighting Gojo. But Yuji saving Megami, finally returning the favor for what Megami did both in the beginning of the story and at the start of the Culling Games arc, makes quite a bit of sense thematically. Both characters are inextricably linked to the concept of saving thematically, and one way that this theme could finally come full circle is by having the one who Megami saved in the beginning of the story finally save him at the end of it. Yuji's participation in the Culling Games was supposed to be that moment. Saving Sumiki was supposed to be how he paid back his friend, but they both failed. In part, this is because of Yorozu, but also largely because of Sukuna's interference at a crucial moment in Megami's mental state. Because of this, I truly can't think of a better way to tie everything together than just having Yuji and Megami resolve their conflict with Sukuna in a very physical, very violent way, possibly even mirroring Yuji's final fight with Mahito in Shibuya. The soul being reintroduced into the story as a big factor with Yuji's new abilities definitely makes some unforeseen possibilities a potential reality, as no matter how thematically profound this 2v1 could be, it is all moot unless Gege finds a way to orchestrate this fight and bring it into reality. In the most conservative of cases, where we're being as strict as possible with our speculations, Megami doesn't have to assist in the battle with Sukuna within the real world. Just as we once saw Yuji fight Sukuna within his innate domain, it would be a really cool, interesting callback to have Yuji fighting Sukuna in the physical world, only being able to have the success that he has because Megami is finally fighting back within his and Sukuna's innate domain. The jumping that Jujutsu Kaisen is known for would be brought back in a massive way, and we as the audience would finally get to see a really big Megami and Yuji fight, while also seeing Sukuna get put in his place permanently. I could definitely see one of these characters dying in this battle, just due to the nature of it being the climax of the story, and the fact that they aren't facing any old sorcerer. They're going up against a top 2 force in the verse, and even if they awaken, and if they have some assistance throughout their battle, defeating Sukuna would still be a tall task for the 2 young sorcerers. In a technical sense, if Gojo is defeated by Sukuna, it would be the tallest task that anybody in Jujutsu Kaisen history would ever be asked to accomplish. Something that I think is very fitting for 2 very talented, very built up main characters. Regardless, Sukuna versus Yuji and Megami is my personal pick for being the final fight of the series. And if done right, it would likely be my favorite fight in Jujutsu Kaisen as well. Yuta could lead the charge against Kenjaku while this 2v1 is happening, assisted by the likes of Maki, Hikari, Miwa, Kusakabe, and whoever else is even alive to assist. But if I were a betting man, I'd put it all on Sukuna being the last real hurdle for the main cast. As the strongest antagonist left and the most thematically and emotionally resonant one, that's simply how I see things playing out. But I am curious what y'all's thoughts are about who the final villain of the series will be. Gege has set it up so that Kenjaku or Sukuna could feasibly be the one to take the crown, so I want to see what the consensus is down below. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more Jujutsu Kaisen content like this, subscribe, hit the bell, and check out this massive playlist of videos for you to binge at your own leisure. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.